Hello and welcome to the Game of Growth from two people who have played Tiddlywinks. My name is John Cassidy-Rice.
And I'm Miles Cassidy-Rice.
And this week we're talking about accomplishments. And so there's lots of accomplishments that we have, and we're going to define that and talk about the importance of goal setting and why having too many goals may be a problem. But before we get there, what's your win of the week?
Yep, so my accomplishment of the week
I see what you've done there.
was my son started school this week. So the day before I took him out, we had a Father Sunday and we went to an arcade and I won him a little Minecraft toy on the claw machine.
He loves Minecraft.
Yeah.
So my win of the week is I've started exercising again after a period of time where I put it off, and I've started doing some body weight exercises.
I was going to say, you look a little bit more muscular today.
Thank you. Yes, I've done 10 push-ups.
So your win of the week is 10 push-ups.
My win of the week is that I can still do 10 push-ups.
Okay.
That was down from my height of when I was fit, and then we're going back to 10 years. I could do 100 push-ups, so I could now do 10. And it's an accomplishment. I felt accomplished.
Good job.
So define an accomplishment for you in the context of what we're talking about.
Yeah, so an accomplishment is some sort of success. So you mentioned goal setting already, but it could be achieving a goal that you've been working towards, or it could be just achieving something that you've been working towards for a while and you've successfully done that.
Yes. And I would suggest that we're goal-centric beings. We're our happiest working towards a clearly defined goal. And you can tell when you lose motivation because, especially if you worked in sort of any businesses, when people know exactly what they're working towards and what they need to do, they tend to be much more motivated towards doing that. As long as the value's there and they resonate with what the goal is. But if you've got a team and they're not really sure what to do next or what the direction they're moving towards, then energy disappears, the motivation drops.
Yeah. And individually as well, some people might not have that direction at that time. So again, thinking about on that individual level, what are your personal goals? What are you personally working towards as well?
Yes. So we're talking a lot about goals and talking about having goals at work, having goals in personal life, etc. And we talked about the danger of having too many goals. Well, we mentioned it. So talk about that idea of having too many goals.
Yeah, so when we're thinking about goal setting, we want to ensure that we've identified a couple that we really want to be working towards, because if we identify too many goals at once, we run that danger of never really having the motivation to complete each of the goals, and you put a little bit of effort to one and a little bit of an effort to another one, and you never truly push through and achieve one goal because you've spread yourself too thin across a few goals. So having that clear direction, what's most important right now for me to achieve before moving on to your next goal.
Yes. And I think one of the things, the dynamics that happens to us, we think when we set a goal, it's a clear path from A to B. But really, it's a wiggly path that goes up and down and actually goes off in detours. And I think one of the things that's happening there is that we set a goal and your unconscious mind does several things. One is starts to sort of think about it and process the goal itself. And it also starts to think about who do you need to become to have achieved this goal? Because one of the reasons to set goals is not so much for the end result, which is important, but also for who are you going to become? And that's important. And that's why your role models and your people that you idolize are really important, because they can frame the unconscious mind around the behavior. So be careful who you idolize. So we set this goal. The unconscious mind goes, who do we need to become? And for you to become something, you need to have certain lessons in life. And some of those lessons in life suck. They seem like setbacks. But your unconscious mind, and challenge me on any of this, unconscious mind is scanning your environment, looking for situations where you can go, put you in a situation where you can have a learning experience. And once you've had that learning experience, a lot of people go, wow, that was harsh. Maybe this goal's not for me. and start to work on another goal. And the unconscious mind has basically gone, I just spent ages putting you in a situation to have that lesson. We've had the lesson, we can now move on to the next lesson. And it's a chance, and each lesson is a chance to grow. And I think that's sometimes one of the reasons why people give up on a goal too soon, because something's gone wrong. So they think it's not for me.
Yeah, and I would frame that within this PERMA model that we've been talking about. If we think back to our last episode where we talked about meaning, you mentioned that road from A to B is wiggly and we might have setbacks. So the actual process of goal setting is really, really important, because we want that meaning behind it, so that when we do come up against these challenges, just like what we talked about in meaning, those adverse situations we can push through if there's something that really provides that purpose for us. So if our goal, we've clearly set our goals and we've gone through that process of actually figuring out where we want to be, then if we've done it correctly, we should be able to push through those adverse situations and those challenges and still maintain our track towards the goal, even though it might not be a straight line from A to B as we would always hope would happen.
And I think this is where we see everything's connected. So a lot of time when we talk about meaning, we talk about values and purpose, where values are abstract words like happiness, fulfillment. They're abstract and they mean different things to different people. And we talked a lot about the differences, especially within the context in the last podcast. And I forgot where I'm going now. So they're abstract, whereas goal setting is taking the abstract and putting it into a much more detailed, concrete plan.
Yeah. So what frameworks do you like to use to actually go through that process and develop a concrete plan?
So first off, I actually do start with values. So when we're doing a goal setting, and I do an exercise where we pull out as many values as we possibly can. And what I mean by pull out by that is using questions and allowing the person you're working with to come up with their own values. And I'll often frame it as though we need to let's come up with 100 values that drive us in this context. People go, well, 100? They come out 3 or 4 and go, that's it, I can't think of any more. And I'll sort of say, what else can you think of? And they say, well, I can't really think of anything else apart from, and they come out with another 5 or 10. And then we normally get about 30 or 40 values out. And then we hierarchy them. So we put them into hierarchy. So what's your number one value? And often the number one value is the 40th thing they've said. It wasn't the first thing on their mind. So once we get the values aligned, then I use a combination of either, so what do you want? What's your goal here? So very simple questions. And I think the classic one is SMART.
Yeah. So when we talk about SMART, we're not just talking about you, John, but we're talking about specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time frame.
Right. So specific. So knowing exactly what you want. So what's the difference between something being reasonably vague and something being precise?
Yeah. So a lot of the times when I'm working with athletes, for instance, they might say, "Oh, I wanna be better at my passing." Yeah. And it's like, what does that actually mean? What do you actually mean by you want to be better at your passing? So then we get into the specifics of it. So it might be, oh, I want to be better at making those 5-yard passes to a teammate. So we're looking at those shorter length passes. Okay, now we're starting to get a little bit more specific. Yes. There's a specific technique in there that we've identified that we can look to improve.
Yes. And you can even get much more specific on that. So within that 5-yard pass, you can sort of say, when somebody curves the ball, or I don't know if that's a terminology.
It might be one touch passing within that 5-yard space,
yes,
rather than 2 touch if you're coming under pressure. Right. And this is in football, by the way. I didn't specify that. So.
Right. So if we're going to get specific about it, can we get too specific?
I would argue that more often than not, the more specific you can be, the better, because that clearly defines what you're trying to do. If you're not specific enough, then you could argue that just about hitting that target would meet that goal. So if you can be very specific in terms of what you're trying to achieve, then that clearly identifies what you're looking to.
Right. So in the game of tennis, I think it's Timothy Galloway. I think that's the author's name.
Yeah.
He talks about sort of getting somebody talking about when they're doing a serve, to really observe the spin of the ball, which way is the ball spinning. Would that be too specific, or is that really kind of focusing in down onto the nuts and bolts so that you actually have something to work with?
I would, and I'm not a tennis expert, so don't take me on my word from this, but I would argue is that specific enough? Because what are you trying to achieve from that?
Right.
What's the actual purpose of identifying the spin of the ball? What spin are you looking for? What's the outcome of that? Are you looking for, am I looking at the spin of the ball to be able to return the serve?
Yes.
Is it to improve my footwork, to identify when to start my footwork a little bit quicker? There has to be that specific, this is why I'm improving this.
Okay, so what makes sense then is to actually have a much more in-depth conversation. I think that most people do around goals, and knowing exactly what they want.
Yeah.
And I do know for myself that I think sometimes the most valuable time I can have with a client is I spend the whole session defining what they actually want.
Yeah, and the important part there is that they're the expert, right?
Yes.
So we talked about tennis. Again, I'm not super familiar or I haven't worked a lot in
well,
the
use
sport,
football.
so,
Use football as an example because you're.
Well, I was just going to say, so in that situation, obviously I would come in with knowledge. I would do some research in the sport first of all.
Oh, yes.
But the person that I'm working with, the client, is the expert in that situation. So I'm also leaning on their expertise and I'm guiding that process, but they're coming out with these goals. And so my questioning would be around why spinning in particular, what are you trying to look for there? So instead of me coming out with some hypotheticals, maybe it's the footwork, they'd be actually able to tell me, well, I'm not moving off of the line fast enough when that serve happens. So by identifying that spin of the ball, I can then move quicker, or I can move my footwork in the right way, for instance.
And I guess that's actually an advantage. So you're coming in as a sports psychologist, rather than being an expert in tennis. And I think there's real value in working with experts in tennis, people who really know the game.
Yeah.
But they also come with a whole lot of assumed knowledge. So you may ask different types of questions as a sports psychologist to help clarify, perhaps want to get clarification about something. And that's why sometimes companies do this as well. They hire an outsider to come in and talk. It may not be an expert in the field of what they're working on, but to ask the obvious questions sometimes, which is not obvious when you're there because it's assumed knowledge.
Yeah. Yeah. So a little bit off topic, but going into my role a little bit, yes, I would come in and I never assume that I'm the expert in that sport and what they're trying to do in that sport. I'm the expert in developing those mental skills to support them in that sport.
Yes.
So a lot of the sporting knowledge comes from them. And again, sports like football, I may have a little bit more depth of knowledge in that area, but I'm never treading on the coaches, right? That's their role.
Yes.
They're there to kind of facilitate that aspect of the sport. I'm there to support in that mental side.
Yeah.
So I'll lean on their knowledge of the sport as well as obviously coming in with my own research and understanding of the sport.
Fabulous. So getting back to this idea of getting very precise with your goals.
Yeah.
Do you have a way to help somebody get precise with their goals? Something quick that somebody could do?
Yeah. So one thing that I like to do is take the context out of the setting first before we reapply it into the setting. So a fun one that I like to do with teams that I work with is, for instance, egg drop challenge. You supply a bunch of resources and say, I'm going to drop this egg out of the window in half an hour. Now we're going to implement the smart goal setting into this setting. So with specific, you go, how can you be specific with this task? And they say, well, I don't want the egg to crack at the bottom when you drop it. And okay, so how can we get more specific than that? What do you want to achieve in this time frame to ensure that doesn't happen? And then they start to think about, well, we want to reduce the rate at which the egg falls or the speed at which the rate falls, depending on what age you're working with. They might use different terminology. So then they think about, okay, so we want to design some kind of parachute, for instance. So within that setting, again, we're starting to get a little bit more specific. Okay, I'm adding a parachute here. And then we go, okay, specifically what kind of parachute, what will support the egg? So then you gradually encourage that conversation for them to think a little bit deeper about that egg drop challenge. And then once they've had that practice of doing it within some income related to what you're trying to achieve, then you go, okay, we've talked about this. How can you be specific in your goal now? How can you be the egg in this scenario?
That's a smashing exercise.
Yeah. Sometimes.
It's excellent.
Okay.
I'll go for the obvious one.
Yeah.
But there is something that you said within that I think is really important. So I've got to sort of pull it out.
Okay.
One of the things is, what do you want to happen? Not what you don't want to happen, but
Yeah.
what do you want to happen? So that's because I think it's based on, I can't remember the researcher's name, but based on how the brain processes information. So there's a thought experiment. I'm sure you've done this before, and I'm sure you've done this before, but bear with me. So it's a quick thought experiment. Whatever you do, do not think about a blue elephant up a pink tree. That's a blue elephant up a pink tree. Do not think about it. That's blue elephant, pink tree. Not think about it.
I think you've used this on the podcast before.
I have already, yeah. But some things are really important. You need to repeat them. So what are you doing? You're thinking about it. So ask for what you want to happen, what you don't want to happen. So it creates different images in the mind. So when you sort of say ask for what you want to happen, I think that's really important and quite easily be missed. And I know it seems obvious, but a lot of time you ask somebody what they want to happen, and they will start with, well, what I don't want to happen. Yeah, that's not what I asked you.
Yeah. If going back to my football example, it might be, I don't want to lose the ball on a 5-yard pass. And you're like, okay, well, what do you?
Yeah. You tend to get what you focus on.
Yeah.
Which brings us down to measurement. So measurement.
Yeah.
So what you measure, you tend to improve upon, which is a saying that any marketer will gladly tell you about. So what does that mean to you?
So it's being able to clearly measure or identify your progress over that period of time. So I'll go back to my football example of that 5-yard pass. We'll say 1-touch 5-yard pass. We'll look at that within currently, reflect on your past game. Out of 10 times, how often did you make that pass? And they might say, well, I made it 3 times. That gives us a number to start working with.
Yes.
And then we go, okay, so where do we want that number to go? And a little bit further down, we'll talk about time, which is where this will link in with time. We'll say by the end of your goal setting, or by the time you're achieving the goal, what do you want that number to look like? And we can maybe say, okay, 8 times out of 10, you're successful in that pass. So then moving forward, every time we check in with that goal, you go, okay, recently out of 10 times in your practice or in your games, how often have you hit that pass? They say, okay, maybe we've gone 5 times, maybe it's 6 times, maybe we've gone down to 4 times recently. Talk about why that happens, but it gives us something to measure and see that progress as it's happening.
So what if you've got something that's subjective? Somebody says, I want to be happy.
Okay, is that specific? Because we go back to the first point. How can we make this specific?
Yes. So I want to smile at least 5 times a day, and that then gives us something to measure. Yes. So that first bit of work is vitally important.
The specific is very important before then you start to think about how can I actually measure this.
Yes. Okay, excellent. So what's next in our SMART?
So then we've got Achievable. So this goes on to, when we set goals, sometimes we may overextend ourselves, and we actually want achievable goals, because if we, like you mentioned earlier on, if we give up on goals, it gives it the opposite intention of, we want that motivation towards the goal and we want that feeling of success. So if we're never achieving our goals, we're never feeling that success, and we start to become demotivated in the process. So actually setting something that we believe is achievable ensures that we're working towards something that is something that, I almost said realistic, but that's the next step. Is something that we can actually achieve within.
Yes. So one way how I think about it, and I'm just going to repeat what you've said really, is that if a goal's too big, it's demotivating. We lose energy. If the goal's too small, strangely enough, that's demotivating because it's too easy. How often have you put something off that you knew would make a difference, but actually it's just too easy to achieve, and you think, I'll get around to it later. So it's actually demotivating. So the ideal goal is that, yes, you have to grow, you have to stretch, but you still think you can do it. And then once you've stretched that little bit, you can stretch a bit further next time. So, and that's what we mean by achievable. Yes, you have to grow, you have to stretch, you have to do something to achieve it. That it's not too big, it's overwhelming. It's just like the porridge, it's just right.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's having that, okay, is this something that we can actually do, and
Yeah.
is it going to be something that we can realistically work towards?
Yes. So how is realistic differently then?
So I realized I got the SMART acronym a little bit wrong, because then I was realizing actually it's not realistic. I use relevant.
Relevant, yeah. I was going to say,
yeah.
we all make mistakes.
Yeah. Yeah, so relevant is the next stage
Right,
of
okay.
the goal setting process. So achievable in the passing scenario, if we're working towards 3 times out of 10 to 8 times out of 10, is that realistic for this individual? We'll have a discussion on, do you think
Yes.
do you think you could hit 8 times out of 10 from this goal? And that, again, I don't want to step on someone's toes. I want it to come from them, and if they truly feel like it's achievable, then I'm going to support them in that, and of course have that conversation, but that's coming from them, so I respect that.
Yeah. And I think when it comes from them and it's not working for them, there's a couple of things that happen. One is they'll actually want to try and avoid talking to you because they know they actually didn't mean it.
Yeah.
Well, not didn't mean it, but didn't achieve it.
Yeah.
But two, they'll come up with excuses, and sometimes just challenging that, going, which is enough of, and that's why you're not giving them advice. You're allowing them to come to their own answers, because I think sometimes it's really important for us to have a lived experience of going, actually, I set too much of a goal there, so I overextended myself. I didn't take into account as I got everything else going on in my life.
Yeah.
And actually, that realistic does make a difference.
Yeah, and then that links back to measurable as well, because we want to measure progress, because when we check in, if they're not making that progress as we thought they might be, then there's no shame in actually changing that goal to become more achievable at that point, because what we don't want is that complete lack of motivation. We want to make sure that we're checking in and ensuring it's still an achievable goal for that individual.
And it needs to also be relevant, so it needs to mean something to the person. So if you're asked to work on a particular skill and you don't see why you need to work on that, so that's why is such an important question.
Yeah.
So why are we working on this? Well, because my manager told me. So why did your manager tell you?
Yeah. So what is that?
Why 5 deep?
Yeah. What's that outcome? What's that end point that you're working towards? Why is that relevant to what you're actually doing right now? So again, within that footballing example, it might be that individual's lost their space on the team because a new manager has come in and they now play a more of a possession-based game. And that one-touch football is more relevant in the current climate of the team. So that athlete wants to improve that one-touch passing on those short passes, because that will allow them to get back into the first team or into the starting lineup.
Okay, so what time's the last one? So why is putting a time frame around it important? And would you do that every time?
Yeah, I would always put a time frame on it, because again, it links back to the rest of the acronym. We want to be measuring our progress towards this, and if we have that certain time frame, then that allows us to see if we're making that progress, and if we're not, then that's where we might shift and change the goal a little bit. If there's no time that we're trying to work towards, then it might always be, oh, we're making progress, and then we go back, and then we're making progress, and then we go back. So again, we always want to end with that sense of accomplishment. So putting that time frame on it just encourages that whole process to happen. And again, we can shift the goal if needed as we're tracking our progress towards it.
Yeah, no, excellent. And if somebody wanted to have a worksheet, they would visit milescassidy-rice.com.
Yep. And you can download a free worksheet directly from the website.
And the link will be down below as well. So have you put this into practice recently, the SMART?
Yeah, so I was working with an athlete recently who had an injury. So they were going through the injury rehabilitation process. Unfortunately, it was quite a serious injury, quite an important time in their season. So initially, when we were discussing that rehabilitation process, goal setting came up, because going from competing in the sport and feeling accomplished, she suddenly lost that sense of accomplishment from achieving the goals that we had previously set. So then we went through that process of shifting. And what I identified very quickly was her mind was kind of all over the place on, I want to achieve my rehabilitation. I want to be hitting certain scores within my sport at this point. I want to be a year from now, I want to be competing in this event. There was just a lot going on in that situation. So what we actually done was sat down and went, what is the most important thing for you right now? What is the most important goal that we could set right now? And obviously rehabilitation was quite important at that point for her.
Yeah.
So that came up as the most important one. So then we went through that SMART goal setting process on that goal, and specifically, or with the specific, what she wanted to achieve from that goal setting or rehabilitation process, how we were going to measure it, if it was achievable, if it was relevant, and what time frame we were working towards. So a little bit easier in some manners with an injury, because there's a specific outcome that you're working towards, and there's a time frame that doctors will often give in terms of return to sport. But it's still an in-depth process of really being specific in what that rehabilitation is going to look like, and not just, I want to rehabilitate, but actually what does it take to reach that point? So we identified specifically attending the gym for low impact exercises, during that process, and ensuring that she was following the physio's guidelines. So that was a big part of that process.
Yes. So SMART can be applied to many different areas.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Fabulous. Wow. Again, we've covered it a lot in such a short period of time. So we started off talking about our wins of the week, and my grandson got a Minecraft toy that you won for him. So that was a great win.
Yeah.
And then we touched upon accomplishment, and what does accomplishment mean? And can you have too many goals? And we talked a little bit about that.
Yeah. And we wanted to emphasize that accomplishment comes from that clear goal setting process. So when we spread ourselves too thin, we don't have that motivation and never really are successful. So we don't get that sense of accomplishment from them. So then we talked about SMART goal setting, and and going through that process once we've identified a clear goal that we're working towards.
Yes, and I repeated myself from using the don't think of a blue elephant up a pink tree. But we've talked about some important concepts within that, and that being precise about what you want to achieve can make such a difference. And it then helps making the rest of the SMART process a lot easier, because it then lends itself to what you measure. If you're unsure what you measure, that probably means that you hadn't been clear enough on what you wanted to achieve.
Yeah, and then once we've identified specifically what we're working towards, and we know how we're measuring it, we want to make sure that it is achievable and is something that you can actually complete within your specific time frame or within your environment, which leans into relevance as well. How does achieving this actually contribute towards your performance environment?
And then it's timed.
Yeah.
And putting the time frame on it, whether you achieve it within that time frame, it's not matter. It's a way to measure and get feedback. But having the time frame works really well, because we as human beings will work to the time that we're given to work with. So if it's open-ended, we will tend to just carry it on and on and on. But once we've got a time frame, the brain can focus in on that. And also, I think this is one of the first sessions I haven't sung on.
Yeah. So don't do it now.
Wow, so I think we've accomplished a lot.
Yeah. And that brings us to the end of the PERMA model. So we've covered positive emotions, engagement, relationships, meaning, and accomplishment.
So we're also going to be looking for some people to coach live on the podcast. So if you're interested in being coached by either Miles or myself around around anything really, so that we can actually start to demonstrate how you put this into action, do contact us at
milescassidy-rice.com.
Yes, there'll be a form there that you can fill in, and we'll ask you a few questions, and then we'll arrange a time for the recording.
Yeah, and you can also email me at miles@milescassidy-rice.com, or also reach out on our comments down below. Or any other way, we'll make sure to check and get back to you.
And whichever platform you're listening on, you can really help us by leaving a comment, and whether it's a like or something that it signals to other people and makes this podcast a lot easier to find. So we really appreciate you doing that.
Thank you so much for your time listening today.
Have a wonderful week, and see you next week.
I haven't got a word for bye again.
Well, I'll go for adios, because I used that last time. Adios.
Goodbye.